I was still awake later than I should have been. The house was quiet in the way it only gets after midnight. No TV, no music. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing far down the road. I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone, trying to convince myself to sleep. I checked the time. 1:46 a.m. That's when my phone rang. I wasn't expecting any calls, especially not that late. Most of my friends were asleep, and my family never called unless something was wrong. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Hello? For a moment there was only silence. No background noise, no static. I thought the call had dropped until I heard breathing on the other end. Slow, controlled. Sorry, a man's voice said quietly. Did I wake you? No, I replied. Who is this? Another pause. I just needed to make sure you were still awake, he said. My stomach tightened. How did you get my number? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he said something that made me sit up in bed. You should probably lock your back door. I glanced toward the dark hallway leading out of my room. I was sure I'd locked everything before going to bed. It was routine. Why? I asked. The man exhaled softly into the phone. Because I don't like being interrupted, he said. And you're the only one up right now. The call ended. I stared at my phone long after the call ended. The screen had gone dark, reflecting my own face back at me. For a few seconds, I didn't move at all. I just listened, straining to hear anything beyond the normal nighttime sounds of the house. Nothing. No footsteps, no doors opening, no voices. I told myself it had to be a prank, a wrong number, someone trying to scare me for no reason. That explanation felt thin, but it was better than the alternative. Still, I got out of bed. I moved slowly, careful not to make noise, stepped into the hallway and flipping on the small lamp near the stairs. The light felt weak, barely pushing back the darkness. I walked through the house, checking each door the way I always did before bed. Front door, locked. Windows, closed. Back door, locked. I stood there for a moment with my hand still on the deadbolt, replaying the man's voice in my head. You should probably lock your back door. It was already locked. I went back to my bedroom, trying to convince myself the night was over. I lay down again, phone still in my hand, staring at the ceiling. My heart slowly stopped racing, replaced by a dull, uneasy feeling. I checked the time. 1:53 a.m. That's when my phone buzzed. Not a call, a text. From the same unknown number. Good, that helps. My breath caught in my throat. I sat up and typed back before I could stop myself. Me. Who is this? The response came almost immediately. You didn't check the garage. My stomach dropped. I hadn't. I didn't use the garage much. It was mostly storage, boxes, old furniture, things I never bothered to organize. The door that led from the garage into the house stayed locked, and I rarely thought about it. I stared at the dark doorway at the end of the hall. I didn't want to go near it. Another message appeared. You don't hear it yet. That's okay. My hands were shaking now. I typed again, slower this time. Me. Hear what? The reply took longer this time. Long enough for my imagination to start filling in the silence. Then my phone buzzed. The door between us. Before I could respond, I heard it. A faint sound. Not loud, not sudden. Just the quiet click of a metal latch shifting somewhere deep in the house. The sound came from the direction of the garage. I sat there, frozen, my phone clutched in my hand, listening as the silence settled back in. Whatever was happening wasn't rushing, and whoever was on the other end of that phone call was close enough to hear the house the same way I was. I didn't move for a long time after I heard that sound. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. It felt intentional now, like everything had gone still on purpose. I stared at the hallway leading toward the garage, my phone clenched in my hand. I told myself it could have been anything. Old houses made noises. Temperature changes caused metal to shift. I'd heard clicks and pops before, but never like that. My phone buzzed again. You heard it. I swallowed hard. Me. Get out of my house. The reply came slower this time. I'm not inside. That didn't make me feel better. I slid out of bed and crept toward my bedroom door, keeping my steps as light as possible. The hallway light was still on, casting long shadows down the corridor. The door to the garage was at the far end, barely visible. I stopped halfway there. The air felt different, cooler, heavy. I checked the time. 2:04 a.m. Another message appeared. You should stay where you are. That's when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't a click. It was a scrape. Slow, deliberate, like something metal being dragged lightly across the concrete floor in the garage. I backed up immediately, my heart pounding so hard it felt painful. I retreated into my bedroom and quietly closed the door, locking it with shaking hands. I pressed my back against it, listening. The sound stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the noise. My phone buzzed once more. You lock doors when you're scared. I stared at the screen, my hands numb. Me. I'm calling the police. There was a pause. Then, that's fine. They won't get here before I leave. Before I could respond, I heard footsteps. Not in the garage, in the hallway. Slow steps, moving toward my bedroom door. They stopped just outside. I held my breath, tears blurring my vision, my body rigid as I waited for the handle to turn. It didn't. Instead, a voice spoke softly through the door. Not from my phone, from the hallway. You stayed up too late tonight. I didn't respond. I stood there with my back pressed against the bedroom door, my phone clutched in my hand, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away. Whoever was outside didn't knock, didn't try the handle. They just stood there, listening. After what felt like several minutes, I heard the footsteps move away. Slow, unhurried, like there was no rush at all. I stayed where I was, barely breathing, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. A few moments later, my phone buzzed one last time. You did the right thing. Then nothing. No more messages. No more sounds. When the police arrived, they searched the house thoroughly. Every room, every window, the garage. They found no signs of forced entry, no disturbed items, nothing out of place. According to them, no one had been there. The officer asked if I recognized the number that called me. I didn't. When he tried calling it back, it went straight to a disconnected line. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I finally checked the garage door from the outside. It was unlocked. I know for a fact I always lock it before bed. I moved out of that house a month later. But sometimes when I stay up too late and my phone lights up with an unknown number, I still hesitate before answering, because part of me wonders if the call didn't come too late. It came exactly when it was supposed to. Everyone else in the house was asleep. I knew that for a fact. My parents' bedroom door was closed, and the light under it was off. My younger brother had gone to bed hours earlier, and the house had finally settled into that deep, quiet stillness that only happens late at night. I was the only one awake. I sat in the living room with my phone, the TV muted, just scrolling mindlessly to pass the time. I checked the clock on the wall, 2:12 a.m. I remember thinking I should probably go to bed soon. There was nothing left to watch, and my eyes were starting to feel heavy. I stood up and stretched, listening to the house as I did. That's when I heard it, a soft sound from upstairs. Not a loud noise, not a crash, just the faint creak of a floorboard. I froze, immediately listening more closely. Old houses made noises at night. I'd heard them my whole life. Pipes knocked, wood shifted. It was normal, but this sound wasn't random. It sounded like a step. I waited, barely breathing, expecting to hear another one. Nothing followed. I told myself it was nothing and headed toward the stairs, planning to grab a glass of water before going to bed. As I took the first step up, I heard it again. Another creak. This one came from the hallway upstairs, right outside the bedrooms. That's when a thought crossed my mind that made my stomach tighten. If everyone else was asleep, who was moving around up there? I stood at the bottom of the stairs longer than I should have. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every small sound your body makes. I could hear my own breathing, the soft buzz of the refrigerator behind me. Nothing else. I told myself not to be stupid. Everyone was asleep, I knew that. The creak could have been anything. The house settling, old wood shifting, even my imagination filling in gaps because I was tired. Still, I didn't turn the lights off. I climbed the stairs slowly, placing each foot carefully, trying not to make noise. Every step felt louder than the last. When I reached the top, I paused, listening. The hallway was dark, but I could see the faint outline of the bedroom doors. My parents' door was closed, just like it always was at night. My brother's door was closed, too. Nothing looked out of place. I took a step into the hallway. The floor creaked again. This time it came from behind me. I turned quickly, my heart jumping, but the stairs were empty. I stood there, frozen, trying to convince myself I was misjudging where the sound came from. I walked to my parents' door and leaned in close, listening. I could hear my dad snoring faintly through the wood. My mom shifted in her sleep. They were definitely asleep. I moved to my brother's room next. His door was slightly ajar, just like he always left it. I peeked inside. He was curled up under his blanket, fast asleep. That left only one room. The bathroom at the end of the hall. The door was open. I was sure it had been closed earlier. I stood there staring at it, replaying the night in my head. I couldn't remember anyone using it. I couldn't remember opening it myself. Slowly, I walked toward it. The light inside was off, but the room wasn't completely dark. A faint glow from the streetlight outside the window gave just enough visibility to see the sink, the mirror, the edge of the shower curtain. Everything looked normal. I turned away, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The mirror. There was fog on it. Not a lot, just enough to look like someone had been standing there recently. I stared at it, my mind racing. The house wasn't humid. No one had taken a shower, and the fog wasn't fading. It looked fresh. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding now. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I just stood there listening, waiting for another sound. That's when I heard it. A soft exhale. Not from behind a door, not from downstairs, from somewhere very close, right in the hallway with me. I didn't turn around right away. Story 2-02. The sound was too close. If I moved too suddenly, I felt like whatever was there would react. My body went cold, every muscle tense, as I stood there staring at the fogged mirror at the end of the hallway. The soft exhale came again, slower this time. It didn't sound threatening. It didn't sound rushed. It sounded calm, like whoever was breathing wasn't worried about being discovered. That scared me more than anything else. I forced myself to turn my head slightly, just enough to see behind me. The hallway was empty. No movement, no shadows shifting, nothing. But the air felt different, heavy, like the space around me was occupied even though I couldn't see anyone. I took a step backward, my heel brushing lightly against the carpet. The sound was barely audible, but it was enough. The fog on the mirror shifted, just a little, like something had moved in front of it. My heart slammed against my ribs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run into my parents' room and wake them up, but my body refused to move. Another breath came from my right side this time, closer. I could feel it against my ear, not warm, not cold, just present. I spun around, panic finally breaking through, and stumbled toward my parents' bedroom door. I grabbed the handle and twisted it hard. Locked. They locked their door at night. I knocked once, then again, harder this time, my voice coming out shaky as I called their names. Behind me, the hallway stayed quiet, too quiet. The mirror let out a faint creak as the fog finally began to fade, like whatever had been there was stepping away. My parents' door opened suddenly, and the light from their room flooded the hallway. I nearly collapsed forward as my dad grabbed my arm, asking what was wrong. I turned to point toward the bathroom. The mirror was clear now. The hallway looked normal again. No fog, no sound, no sign of anyone else. I tried to explain, my words tumbling over each other, but even as I spoke, it sounded ridiculous. My parents exchanged looks, clearly unconvinced, but concerned enough to check the house. They found nothing, but as I stood there in the light, I realized something that made my stomach sink. The hallway no longer felt empty. It felt abandoned, like something had been there, and had only just decided to leave. My parents didn't let me go back to sleep that night. They made me sit in their room until morning, insisting it had probably been a bad dream mixed with exhaustion. I didn't argue. I didn't know how to explain what I'd felt without sounding ridiculous, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. The next morning, the house looked completely normal. Sunlight filled the hallway. The bathroom mirror was clear and clean. No fog. No signs anyone else had been there. Still, I checked everything. Doors, windows, the back entrance. Nothing was unlocked. Nothing was disturbed. My parents brushed it off, telling me stress could do strange things when you stay up too late. I tried to accept that explanation, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Later that day, my mom asked why I'd locked the hallway bathroom window. I hadn't. She said it was always left cracked open at night for ventilation. But that morning, it was shut tight, latched from the inside. No one admitted to closing it. After that night, I stopped staying up late. I made sure someone else in the house was awake before midnight, even if it meant pretending I needed water or couldn't sleep. Years have passed since then. I don't live in that house anymore. But even now, when I'm awake late at night and everyone else is asleep, I get that same uneasy feeling, like I'm not supposed to be the only one awake, like something notices when I am, and like it prefers the house quiet before it decides to leave. I shouldn't have gone outside that late. I knew that even before I stepped out of the house, but I hadn't slept properly all night, and my head felt heavy in that way it does when you've been staring at a screen for too long. I just needed air, 5 minutes, that's all. I checked the time before locking the door behind me. 2:03 a.m. The street was quiet. Not just empty, but still. No passing cars, no voices, no distant music. Even the usual background noise of the city felt muted, like it had been turned down. I started walking, hands in my pockets, telling myself this was normal. People were asleep. It was late. Of course the street was empty. But the farther I walked, the more wrong it felt. Street lights were on, evenly spaced, casting long yellow pools of light on the pavement. Houses lined both sides of the road, dark and silent. No porch lights, no TVs glowing through windows. Not a single sign that anyone else was awake. I reached the end of the block and stopped, looking back the way I'd come. The road stretched behind me, completely empty, no movement at all. That's when I noticed something strange. The silence wasn't passive. It felt focused, like the street itself was paying attention to me. I shifted my weight and heard the sound of my shoes scraping lightly against the concrete. The noise echoed more than it should have, bouncing down the road and disappearing into the darkness. I suddenly became very aware of how loud I was, and how alone. I checked my phone again. 2:09 a.m. That's when I realized something that made my stomach tighten. In the 6 minutes I'd been outside, nothing else had moved. No cars, no lights turning on, no doors opening. It was like the entire street had been frozen in place, and I was the only thing allowed to move. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening to the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It felt stretched thin, like it would tear if anything else made a sound. I shoved my phone back into my pocket and started walking again, this time slower, paying attention to every step. My footsteps sounded wrong, too loud, too clear. Each one echoed down the street as if there were nothing to absorb the noise. No wind, no distant traffic, not even insects. I passed a row of houses I recognized, places I'd walked by hundreds of times during the day. At night, they looked unfamiliar. Windows dark, curtains drawn, driveways empty. One house had its porch light on. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made me uneasy. The light cast a narrow glow over the front steps and the edge of the lawn. Everything beyond it disappeared into shadow. I slowed as I passed it, half expecting the door to open. It didn't. I checked the time again. 2:17 a.m. I realized then that I hadn't seen a single moving thing since stepping outside. No stray cats, no cars driving by, no lights turning on or off. It felt staged, like the street was set up to look normal without actually being alive. I stopped walking. The silence stayed exactly the same. I took a step backward. Still nothing. Then, somewhere behind me, I heard a sound. Not footsteps. A shift. Like weight settling. I turned around slowly. The street behind me looked identical to the way it had moments earlier. Empty and still. The streetlights glowed steadily. Shadows lay unmoving across the pavement. I told myself I'd imagined it. That's when it happened again. The sound came from farther down the block this time. Not closer, just present. Like something had adjusted its position without making a step. My heart started beating faster. I didn't want to run. Running would mean admitting something was wrong. Running would make noise. So I walked. I headed back toward my house, keeping my pace steady, pretending everything was fine. I told myself that if I didn't acknowledge whatever this was, it would stay hypothetical. Behind me, something moved. Not fast, not slow, just enough to stay in the same relative distance. I didn't look back. I reached the end of my block and turned the corner. My house was halfway down, its shape barely visible in the darkness. I felt a sudden wave of relief. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My house was the only one with a light on. Not inside, outside. The porch light was glowing, something I never left on. I slowed, my chest tightening. As I stood there, staring at it, I heard the sound again. This time, it came from behind me, closer than before. Close enough that I knew one thing for certain. Whatever had been on that street with me had followed me back. I stood there staring at my porch light, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I was sure I hadn't left it on. I never did. It attracted bugs, and I liked keeping the outside of the house dark at night. Seeing it glowing now felt like a signal, like something wanted me to know exactly where to go. I took a few slow steps forward, listening. Behind me, the street stayed quiet. Too quiet. I reached the edge of my driveway and stopped. The light above the door cast a weak circle on the concrete, but everything beyond it faded into shadow. I didn't step into it right away. I didn't know why, but it felt like crossing a line. That's when I heard it again. A faint sound from across the street. Not footsteps, more like fabric brushing lightly against something. I turned my head just enough to look. The streetlight across from my house flickered once. In that brief moment, I saw a shape standing near the sidewalk. It didn't move when the light steadied again. It didn't react to being seen. It just stayed there, half hidden in shadow, tall enough that I could make out its outline but not its features. I knew better than to stare. I turned back toward my house and walked faster now, keys already in my hand. I reached the front door and unlocked it with shaking fingers, pulling it open and stepping inside without looking back. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then I stood there in the dark, listening. Nothing followed me in. No knocking, no footsteps on the porch. I flicked on the living room light and waited, my breath shallow, my ears straining for any sound from outside. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was over. Whatever had been out there hadn't crossed the street. It hadn't tried to stop me. I walked to the front window and carefully pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. The sidewalk was empty. The porch light was off. I hadn't turned it off. I backed away from the window slowly, my stomach tight with fear, because something had stood outside my house, and it had left on its own. I didn't sleep much after that. I stayed on the couch with the lights on until the sky outside started to lighten. Every small sound made me tense. The refrigerator clicking on, the house settling, a car finally passing down the road just before sunrise. By morning, everything looked normal again. The street was busy. People were leaving for work. Cars were parked where they always were. The porch light was off, just like it usually was during the day. I walked outside and checked the light fixture, expecting to find a loose switch or some kind of malfunction. There was nothing wrong with it. I asked my neighbors later if anyone had been outside late the night before, if they'd seen or heard anything unusual. They all said the same thing. They'd slept through the night. No one remembered seeing me outside. No one remembered a porch light being on. No one remembered anything strange. I stopped going out late after that. If I needed air, I opened a window. If I couldn't sleep, I stayed inside. I avoided that quiet stretch of time after midnight when everything seems paused. Years later, I moved away from that street. But sometimes when I'm awake late and the world feels a little too still, I think about that night, about how empty the street felt, about how something noticed me when nothing else was moving. And I wonder if it wasn't following me at all, if it had already been waiting there. I knew I wasn't going to sleep that night, not because I wasn't tired, I was exhausted, but because every time I closed my eyes, that feeling came back, the one that tells you something isn't right, even when everything looks normal. I was alone in my apartment, sitting on the edge of my bed with the lights off. The city outside was quiet, the way it only gets in the very early hours of the morning. No traffic, no voices, just distant hum and silence. I checked the time on my phone, 2:41 a.m. I told myself to stop being paranoid. I'd lived alone long enough to know that nights like this happen. Your mind drifts. Fear sneaks in when you let it. Still, I didn't lie down. I stayed sitting there, listening. That's when I realized something that made my chest tighten. The apartment felt occupied. Not loud, not active, just present. Like I wasn't alone anymore. But whatever else was there didn't need to move. It didn't need to make noise. It felt patient. I stood up and checked the locks. Front door, locked. Windows, shut. Bathroom empty. Closet empty. Everything was exactly how it should have been. But the feeling didn't leave. I went back into my bedroom and sat down again, this time closer to the door. I didn't know why. It just felt wrong to turn my back on it. I checked my phone again. 2:58 a.m. That's when I understood something that made my stomach drop. Whatever was making me feel this way wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't rushing. It felt like it had all night. I stayed where I was, sitting on the edge of my bed, listening to the quiet. It wasn't complete silence. There were distant sounds, an elevator humming somewhere in the building, a faint siren far away. But inside my apartment, everything felt paused, like the air itself was holding still. I told myself that if something was wrong, I'd hear it. Footsteps, a door opening, anything. Instead, there was nothing. That's what made it unbearable. I stood up and walked into the living room, turning on a small lamp near the couch. The light made the room feel smaller, like it was pushing shadows into the corners instead of chasing them away. I scanned the room slowly. Nothing was out of place. Couch cushions untouched, windows closed, front door locked. I checked the peephole, half expecting to see someone standing there. The hallway outside was empty. The light above the elevator flickered softly, just like it always did. I locked the deadbolt again anyway. When I turned back toward the living room, the feeling returned, stronger. Not fear exactly, awareness. Like I just turned my back on something that didn't need me to see it. I sat down on the couch and checked the time, 3:12 a.m. I told myself I just had to stay awake until morning. That was it. Whatever this was, it felt tied to the night. Once the sun came up, it would lose whatever hold it had. At least, that's what I hoped. Minutes passed slowly. My phone screen dimmed. The lamp hummed faintly. Every once in a while, I thought I heard something shift behind me. Not a sound, but a change in pressure, like the room had subtly rearranged itself. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. At some point, I realized I'd been sitting completely still for too long. My muscles ached, my back stiff, but I didn't dare move. It felt like motion would draw attention, like whatever was sharing the apartment with me would finally react. I checked the time again, 3:47 a.m. That's when something changed. Not in the room, in me. The feeling stopped pressing in from all sides and instead, focused. Like whatever was there had settled on a spot, right behind the bedroom door. I stared at the dark hallway leading back to my room. The door was open the way I'd left it, a black rectangle against the lighter wall. I hadn't heard it move, but I was certain now. Whatever had been waiting all night wasn't wandering anymore. It had chosen where to stand, and it was content to stay there until morning came. I didn't move my eyes from the bedroom doorway. The longer I stared at it, the more wrong it felt. The darkness inside the room looked heavier than the rest of the apartment, like it wasn't just the absence of light, like it was filled with something I couldn't see. I checked the time again, 3:51 a.m. Only minutes had passed, but it felt much longer. I told myself to stand up, to walk over and close the door. One simple movement, one small act of control, but my body refused to listen. It felt like whatever was behind that doorway was aware of me considering it. The air shifted. Not a sound, not movement, just a subtle change, like the room had inhaled. My heart started pounding harder, my chest tight. I swallowed and leaned forward slightly, still seated on the couch. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The shadow beneath the bedroom doorframe was wrong. It wasn't spreading the way shadows normally do. It pushed outward in a narrow shape, uneven at the edges, like it belonged to something standing just inside the room. I stared at it, my vision blurring, my mind racing through explanations that didn't make sense even as I thought them. Then it moved. Not forward, not back. It adjusted, like whatever was there had shifted its weight. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me so badly I almost dropped it. The screen lit up, briefly illuminating the living room. In that split second of light, the shadow disappeared. I checked the screen. No message. Just a low battery warning. When the screen went dark again, the shadow was back, exactly where it had been. I felt tears well up in my eyes, my breathing shallow and fast. I wanted to scream, but the idea of making noise felt dangerous. Like sound was something that could be noticed. Minutes passed. The shadow didn't move again. Neither did I. I sat there, staring at it, counting my breaths, counting seconds that felt like hours. I checked the time again, my hands shaking. 4:29 a.m. The night wasn't ending fast enough. Whatever was standing in that doorway wasn't trying to scare me. It wasn't threatening. It was waiting. Waiting for exhaustion. Waiting for weakness. Waiting for the moment I stopped watching. And as the minutes dragged on, I realized something that made my stomach drop. It wasn't trapped there with me. I was trapped there with it. I don't remember exactly when the night started to loosen its grip. At some point, the darkness in the apartment began to thin. The heavy silence faded into something more ordinary. Distant traffic returned. A bird chirped somewhere outside. When I checked my phone again, it was 6:03 a.m. The shadow beneath the bedroom doorway was gone. I didn't move right away. I stayed seated on the couch, staring at the doorway, half expecting it to come back the moment I relaxed. But the feeling, that intense awareness, had lifted. The apartment felt empty again. I finally stood up, my legs weak, and walked slowly toward the bedroom. The room looked normal. The doorframe was empty. No strange shadows. No sign of anything out of place. I checked every corner, every closet, every window. Nothing. By mid-morning, sunlight filled the apartment, and the night felt unreal, like something my mind had exaggerated out of exhaustion. That explanation almost worked, until I noticed the bedroom door. I always kept it closed when I slept. That morning it was wide open, I know I hadn't touched it. I lived in that apartment for 6 more months. Nothing like that night ever happened again. But I stopped sleeping in the dark. I started keeping lights on. I avoided staying awake past midnight whenever I could, because whatever had been there that night didn't feel malicious. It felt patient, like it didn't need to rush, like it knew morning would come, and that it could always wait for another night.